I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. Each week, it's my privilege to bring guests that teach all of us about the environment, awaken our thinking, challenge us a little bit, and warn us about how we're falling down and our responsibility in protecting this environment for future generations. Today's guest is always a treat for me. He always challenges me. His name is Pat Durkin. If you've lived in the Oshkosh, Winnebago area, you can remember him writing for the Green Bay paper, the Oshkosh paper, the Gannett papers, and he's still writing. He's still active. Was raised in the Oshkosh area, lived in Waupaca a while, and now he is over in Eau Claire, but he's on top of things. He's an environmentalist, and he's going to outlive all of us because he takes care of himself. He runs, he watches his diet, he eats fish and wildlife and all the things that you and I ought to be doing. But right now, you better meet him. Pat, welcome to the show.
Thanks for that introduction. Very nice.
Tell us about some of the organizations and publications you're writing for and how people can tune in.
Yeah, it's having done this now 40 years, it's interesting to think how many different places I've written over the years. And these days I'm still writing a lot for the Wisconsin Outdoor News, the Watertown newspaper, Anago newspaper, some small dailies up north of me in Bloomer and Chautauqua and Ladysmith and Barron. And then there's a couple other newspapers that are sporadic for me up north and down in the Wisconsin Dells area. Also, I write nationally almost every week for Meat Eater, the Meat Eater organization. Also, American Hunter still buys some of my stuff, and I think I said Wisconsin Outdoor News, which sometimes that stuff actually goes out nationally too to 6 other papers in their chain. And then I still have my own website where I put most of my stuff, patrickdurkinoutdoors.com. I post my stuff there weekly, so I'm still getting around.
Well, not only that, you're not an armchair sportsman, hunter, fisherman. Mm-hmm. I know that you walk the walk. In fact, didn't you break a leg within the last year on an elk hunt?
Well, the last time I was in here was almost 2 years ago now. And I didn't know at the time when I was in here, but I'd broken my fibula in my left leg. I'd rolled my ankle while packing out elk meat out in Idaho, coming down a steep mountainside in the dark, which I shouldn't have been doing. But I for like 4 months, I kept having this weird pain in my leg, but it wasn't really bad pain. It was just irritating pain. And my ankle got better. They had x-rayed my ankle. My ankle was fine, just had to be healed. Well, then when I moved to Eau Claire about a year and a half ago, went to see a new doctor, and when she was going through all the checklist stuff on me, she got down to the end and said, well, is there anything else I should know about you? And I said, well, it's odd. When I come in from the outdoors, I'll kick my boots, and I kick my right boot to knock the snow off. And I kick my left boot, and every time I kick my left boot, my left leg hurts. And she says, where? And she started feeling around the leg, and said, right about there. And to the touch, it didn't hurt. Well, she said, I think what happened is when you rolled your ankle, it created so much torque, you snapped the fibula. And she said it's very common in soccer and football for people to do that. So she gets me x-rayed, and what was comical to me was when they told me, they called me on the phone and said, this is, you have a fractured fibula. I was picturing like a little hairline crack, because I thought, well, how bad could it be? I have been walking out for 4 months. And well, then I went in to see the orthopedic doctor, and they put that picture of the x-ray up on the computer screen. Sure. And even I, from across the room, could see the leg was broken. but it made me appreciate, though, when they say certain athletes are playing on a broken leg, now I know to ask tibia or fibula. Fibula doesn't impress me, because I know even I walked around 4 months with a broken fibula, didn't know it.
Well, you run too, don't you?
Yeah, I wasn't running then. I run 4 days a week, and I ran my latest marathon over in Traverse City, Michigan, back in Memorial Day weekend. And I plan to run the Whistle Stop Marathon up in Ashland, Wisconsin in October. That's my next race. But I'm finding, George, though, that no matter how hard I work, I'm getting slower every time.
Well,
So
Father Time
it does catch up to you.
eventually wins.
Yep.
But tell our audience a little bit about the things in the outdoors that you enjoy.
My primary thing that I've really fallen in love with in recent years is elk hunting. I really like going out west and hunting these big animals in higher elevations, and it's fun. This year, though, I didn't draw a tag for my spot in Idaho, so my wife and I are taking a little vacation. We're going out to Idaho, to a different part of Idaho, and fishing for yellow perch in Cascade Lake. And I'm kind of a perch panfish geek. I enjoy that. If I had a choice between fishing muskies or fishing perch, I'd go for perch. I do like fishing salmon though too, and I also deer hunt a lot, and I turkey hunt a lot, and I probably still spend more time deer hunting every year than I do anything, but I do try to get out fishing a lot too because I really enjoy it.
Well, didn't your family have a cottage or some property here in Winnebago County
Yeah.
as you were a young man? So you got to catch some perch.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Madison area actually, and my early days of fishing when I was a kid on the Madison lakes was we lived about a mile away from Lake Mendota, and so I'd walk down there or bicycle down there all the time and fish. And then when I got to be a teenager, I had a little four-man Navy rubber raft, and I'd row out in the Lake Mendota and do drop lines, hand lines for yellow perch. And I think that's where I got the love for it. And then in the winter down there in the Madison Lakes, they're very famous for good perch fishing. At least they were back then. And so that kind of, I think it is a childhood thing that kind of sticks with you, that love for panfish. And I like catching walleyes and other stuff too, but I know last weekend I went over to the Mississippi River in the bayous over there and fished for perch with my wife, and we got like 17 of them. A real fun morning.
Well, if there's a better eating fish than perch, I haven't
Right.
found it, and I agree with you. I don't find it that exciting to jerk one of those fish up and clean it and scale it, but it's worth the price.
It's excellent eating. You can't beat them.
We're going to take our first break,
Okay.
and we'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and my guest and friend Pat Durkin is here. He happens to be in Oshkosh giving a speech to UW Oshkosh, and so I was able to borrow a little bit of his time, which is always a treat. We don't really prepare this very well. It's kind of shoot from the hip and see what you get. I'm kind of curious, Pat, as to how you feel the DNR is doing under a new governor.
Before I forget, I never answered your question. My parents owned a place on Lake Poygan. They stayed there like half the year, and I was like 30 years or so that they had that spot. So I did spend a lot of time in this area, and I actually lived in Amro for like 7 years too. So I know this area pretty well. But yeah, I guess overall I like the fact that things have gotten a little more stable. We're not seeing so many attacks on things like our the central sands area of Wisconsin was being pumped really hard without regulation for a few years there. So that stopped when we got the new Attorney General and new governor. Evers, I guess the one thing I'll say nice about Evers is that he's never pretended to be who he's not. He doesn't pretend to be a hunter, doesn't pretend to be a fisherman. He's just not into that kind of stuff. So I kind of trust people who don't try to pretend that they're something. When someone runs for governor and pretends to be a deer hunter, I kind of resent that. So I'll give Evers that much. I was hoping that with the new DNR secretary, we'd see some changes. I think to go back to some more sensible approaches to our managing our natural resources. And it's been kind of like, I guess it's like turning the aircraft carrier. It's hard to move something once it gets moving in a certain direction. So I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. But I wasn't one when Evers put Preston Cole as DNR secretary back 2.5 years ago. I wasn't one of these people who said it was a great idea, because my take at the time was that we've seen Preston Cole in action for many years on the Natural Resources Board. he never struck me as a guy who put his neck out very far. And I think as Dean, our secretary, he's kind of continued to do that. He's been playing it real safe. And as a result, I think we've had a few things go wrong, like our wolf season a couple years ago. I was kind of surprised how out of hand that got. That February 2021 season, where we overshot our quota. So I always say, it goes back to my Navy training, you hold the man at the top responsible. The captain of the ship is always responsible. So.
Well, I think it's kind of exciting that we've got this dentist in Wausau who is stirring the cup a little bit.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I've been real critical of Fred Prain because I know our Supreme Court says otherwise, but the man was put in the office with a specific time element, specific day when his term expired. It was specified, and that's what the Senate approved. That's what he agreed to. So when his time up and expired and he didn't step down, I thought, I think that's not good government, and it creates dysfunction. We have people just deciding on their own not to step down and not let another person take over. But I always point out to people, though, well, elections have consequences, and if you don't vote for people and turn out like I did today, well, these things can happen. Right now, the Republicans hold most of the cards, and they aren't afraid to bend the rules to their whim. And when people write to me, George, and say the Democrats would do the same thing if they had the majority in the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court, the thing I pointed out is that we've had this current situation going on 60-some years now with our DNR and how it appoints things. We've had over 50 people sit on the Natural Resources Board in that time. Only 3 times has someone overstayed their term limit, and all 3 times in the last 20 years, and all 3 times were Republicans. Now that's just the facts. Doesn't mean I'm a Democrat, doesn't mean I'm a Republican, but those are the facts. So you can't say, based on history, that Democrats would have done that.
Well, you and I can't afford to spend the rest of this show on politics, but this country, this state, has never been more intensely partisan, blindly partisan. At least I've never seen it, and I'm going to have my 86th birthday shortly.
Yeah, I agree. I've never seen it like this. I never thought we'd be in a situation where people can just stay on a board beyond their term and not be part of a functional government. That's just not something that's in our background.
Well, before we move on to another subject from politics, I think you make a good point. Elections do matter.
Yeah.
And before you go and knee-jerk vote Democrat because your dad was a Democrat or Republican because your mother was a Republican, think about what this really means in terms of what kind of a state or a nation you want to have. And recognize in our agencies, like the DNR, in our Supreme Court, that politics really seeps into those avenues where probably it shouldn't be, and poisons the well. So we need a more critical electorate. We need a more critical voter, because that's where it all starts.
Right.
Now, enough of the podium.
All right.
We'll take that down. I've got a number of things I want your comment on, and of course I've always been interested in your point of view of the environment. You are basically an environmentalist. You're aware of the poisons in our water, the chemicals we put on our fields, the quality of air, and you've been a real guardian. So while I've spent too much time on introducing the subject, we're going to take our second break, and the last segment's going to be all yours.
Great, thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and my guest is Pat Durkin, who's here in Oshkosh because he's been invited to speak by the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, because he knows of which he speaks. And Pat, I'm going to try not to interrupt you because you've got some real thoughts about the state of our environment, and your thoughts are based on observation, and some of them are a little controversial, which means we should keep our audience.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I like to think, George, that in my lifetime we've done a pretty good job overall of protecting our environment. But my fear these days, as I'm getting to be an old man, is that a lot of people never have really seen how bad things have been in the past, and they're not seeing everything right under the surface. And the example I use is, on the Mississippi River right now. My wife and I went down there last week because we're not that far from there now, where we live in Eau Claire, and we fished in this area back in the backwaters, where there's real thick weeds in there this time of year, but in between there's this real clear water, and these yellow perch have just boomed in recent years in the Mississippi. And a generation ago, yellow perch really weren't much of a species in that area. But with the water clearing out over the years and getting better over the years, and the zebra mussel actually helped improve some of that water quality, which we're so afraid of the zebra mussel, and it still causes problems. But it was one of these invasives that in some ways has some benefits, so the yellow perch are benefiting. But I worry these days when I see some of the rollbacks we've had in Wisconsin. Our wetland protections have really suffered in recent years, and as people make these laws, change these laws that got us into a good place, they're acting like everything that we have right now will just continue that way. And I think, no, my father's generation, your generation, and some of the people older than that really saw how bad things were in the 60s and the 50s in those years, and took some pretty aggressive actions, like the endangered, the Clean Water Act in the early 70s, the Endangered Species Act in 1972. All these things that they did because they saw what happens when you don't regulate this stuff. And so all these things are happening now. I worry that we've kind of forgotten how important those changes in the laws were and how they benefited us. And I still implore young people not to just assume this will continue, that when you see a red sky all the time in the summer in western states, and sometimes even around Wisconsin, you've seen that in recent summers, you see a red sky, that's not a good sign. What are we doing? Why are we having all these nonstop forest fires out west? How can you keep saying there's no evidence of climate change when it's right there in front of you, and when you have these massive floods that come pretty regularly? That should be telling us that these are signs that things aren't right in our world, that we should be worrying about this. And plus, the thing I always tell some of my critics is that you look at the military, the Army, the Navy, they take climate change very seriously. They're monitoring this stuff. They aren't a bunch of wingnut environmental people. They're serious people who are looking at these things, seeing changes, and trying to raise the awareness that if we don't do something about this as a country and as a world, we're going to be really leaving a really big mess for our kids to deal with. And now that I'm older and have grandkids, I really do worry about that. What kind of world they're going to inherit from my generation? Because I look around, I realize I'm losing friends now, and I feel good. My health's good right now, but I also know on a personal level, I have a cousin, and our families, our two shared families, there's no history of cancer in our family. None. We've been really lucky. But then last year, he shows up with it, and a bad case of it. And the only thing we can figure is the environment. He's been around chemicals all his life, and probably got something in his system that didn't react right, and now he's dealing with prostate cancer and colon cancer, which is just unheard of in our family. So I gotta believe there's some connections there that people should not be just ignorant to.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I live out in the country. I have most of my life. We live on several hundred acres, but we rent out a lot of it to a very good farmer. And in the period of time, the farmer has gotten more and more efficient. His corn is perfect. It's not knee-high on the 4th of July. It's waist-high. There are no weeds. There are no bugs. There are no bees. There are no insects. There are no frogs. There are no toads. There are no snakes. So something's going on there that helps the corn but kills a lot of other stuff. And that's what's essential, apparently, for profitable farming today.
Yeah. It's a great picture. I mean, it's not a great picture, but it's an interesting picture you're painting there, because it's something that you're seeing with your own two eyes, and you can't deny that something's changed there. And the more we try to make all these things efficient, things got to give. And I have no doubt that eventually the earth will cure itself. But whether we're around to enjoy those benefits, I do get worried about that, George.
Well, as I heard from a candidate for president way back many years ago, he said, people think that everything will iron itself out, not to worry, it'll iron itself out. And he said, nothing irons itself out unless everybody's ironing. That was Hubert Humphrey, kind of a clever guy.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's one thing I do have enjoyed about my life is I've grown up in times when we had very quotable leaders, and I mean, there's whole books on, this is before my time, but there's whole books on the Lincoln wit, these funny things that come off out of that guy's mouth, the Kennedy wit. And then Hubert Humphrey was famous for these great observations that I always wish I had that gift of gab, where you just these really funny observations and they're so damn true.
Well, you do, and you put it in writing. You have a lot of people reading what you write, and that gives you the opportunity to make enemies, make friends, make points, but it's a lot of responsibility, and I thank you so much for having assumed that responsibility and never ducking a fight.
Well, thank you, George.
Thank you for all of Wisconsin.
You bet. Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I was raised on farms where it was natural and it was understood that you take care of the land. That's how you made your living. That's how your animals were fed. That's how your children were fed. You kept putting back into the soil, and you didn't poison the soil. But a lot of things have changed over the time, and those small northern Wisconsin farms no longer exist, and one of the reasons is they no longer can compete. They can't compete with the large, big fields, family farms, chemical farming, where the crops mature so much better, so much earlier, largely supported by pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, which may help one segment of the farm, but they're poisonous to the rest. And so while this is progress, we can produce 100 times as much on an acre as we could when I was a kid. We're doing it with poisons, and these poisons don't go away. They remain in our air and our water, our soil, and our own bodies, damaging life expectancy, increasing the percentage of people likely to get cancer. Pregnant women shouldn't eat fish at all from most of our waters in the state of Wisconsin, and you and I shouldn't eat it more than once or twice a week. We are poisoning our planet. And if you care about the next generation and generations to come, become educated on elimination of poison, you could save the planet. I'm George Curtis, and I mean it.